Hi, comic fans. I'm Joe, and welcome to Anachronic Comics. So yesterday, we started our retrospective view of the first three episodes of the comic book crowd. And if you didn't see that one, I'll put a link at the end and also in the description. Go watch it when you get a chance. I think you're going to see it's really cool. This episode, I'm going to leave to Alan to introduce. And so here's Alan.
Hey there, Alan here. So next up we'll be talking about episode 2 of the Comic Book Crowd, where we discuss whether we think that at that point of 2022 we were heading towards a comic book price correction. So this is a very interesting time. Coming off of the heels of the big boom and popularity of comic books in general between 2020 and 2022, we kind of wanted to take a pulse and check whether we thought the health of the comic book community as a whole was kind of still at its peak, if it was correcting itself, where we were at that time. So this is a very interesting episode where there's a lot of insights from the comic book crowd and a lot of little tidbits and stories about each and every one of us. So please enjoy.
What we've seen over the pandemic was that there was a skyrocketing of prices of books as well. So one of the things we wanted to discuss today is there a correction happening right now? And if so, does that mean that, prices will keep going down, or if this is just a lull and we're going to shoot straight back up? Because like what we mentioned was like, with all of the, extra material out there, like the movies, the TV shows and whatnot, what is driving the prices?
If a correction means we're going to pull back just a little bit, absolutely, that's probably going to happen. And it's not a negative in my mind because everything is healthy. There's a lot of people going to, yes, the content out there is fantastic. And with the technology, I mean, Stephanie is on Instagram and she has an account and she's communicating and entering the hobby. And so are people, my coworkers at work. And I think that the things that were happening in the 90s are not what's happening right now.
I wasn't around in the 90s, so I don't really know what happened. I mean, I know people.
Okay, you were around. You weren't around comic books.
All right, Matt. Okay. I wasn't around in comic books in the 90s. Alan, you spoke about during the pandemic. We found out there were a lot of people using apps like Robin, I think, and other people that started getting into the stock market, at that time, because whether they was money they got from the government or they were just home and had more time on their hands, they started to do speculation on that, which caused some issues with some companies. You have other situations too where maybe people were looking at comic books as well. They got to know it because they watch great channels like Squirrel Madness or Madam and Master Blaster or Climbing Comics or Matt Woods Comics, and they say, "Oh, look at this!" And now we talk about price all the time, right? Something like CGC and its effect on everything. You could go there and say, "Oh, the fair market value of this is X, and it's gone up 1,000% in the last 2 years." That's pretty enticing to somebody who doesn't know what they're doing and thinks they could just buy stuff and it's going to go up 1,000%. I had some family over and we went downstairs to show them the comics. And so I pulled out my Blue Marvel and, Tales of Blue Marvel. And I pulled it out and I remember I did a whole video on this and I went through why do people like this comic? Why does it keep its value? And should I buy it? And the end result was, yes, I should buy it, and actually had bought it, and I showed it off. It was a 9.6, and 10 or 11 months ago, I bought it for $450, but the FMV on Go Collect, I think, was $550. So I thought I got a great deal on it, right? And when I looked at it maybe a week or two ago, whatever, it was over $1,000. So I'm saying to myself, okay. So if I relay that to my nephew, and he's going, "Wow, look at that!" So if he might go out and say, "I should look for something like this because I'm going to make all this money in a year on this, and I could sell it later on." Well, does that help the hobby?
See, I'm gonna completely flip the cart right here. I have a completely different look on this. Now, I'm gonna say this: I am not a trained economist. I have not gone to school for it, but I play one on TV. So here's my look at it. I equate this to the 1970s with hyperinflation. And you got to look at comic book collecting as it relates to the greater economy. Guys, we're hitting a period where the price of goods are going up relatively quickly. I mean, a 16-year-old kid can get a job paying $15 an hour right now. And even 5 years ago, that is double what kids were getting paid, for minimum wage jobs. Well, $15 isn't minimum wage, but that's an entry-level position right now. And if we're talking about salaries starting to increase and we are doing government handouts, I don't want to say handouts, but we're doing, COVID relief packages from the government where we are getting giant checks going to people like we've never seen before. And I hear that Washington's thinking about doing another one in the springtime. Well, that's really driven up the prices in the last few years, but I think we're in a little low right now. But I don't think that we're at the end of it. I think we're going to just keep on continuing to go up with cooler periods. I just think we're in a cool period right now. Because I say this, I'm going to be completely wrong, but listen, MCU, DECU, they have put this stuff, comic books into the mass culture. Now, not everybody that's coming into collection or comic book collecting is necessarily a comic book reader, but they like the characters. They watched, Iron Man, and they want that Tales of Suspense number 39 because, hey, they like Iron Man whenever they were a kid. That was a movie that came out, and it was spectacular, great effects. And now they want that. And those people are going to still, people that aren't your traditional comic book readers are still wanting to get those books, even though they're not like us. So there's still new money going to come into it. And I'm telling you, being a comic book collector is a semi-cool hobby now, where 30 years ago, we might not have been considered cool kids on the block at the moment.
Well, I was thinking a little bit about what Alan started out with, which is I came in around again the same time 3 years ago. And I'll tell you, the books that I was looking at buying 3 years ago, and the books, if I look at those same books now, they're nowhere dropping close to the price they were 3 years ago. And yeah, I think there's kind of an up and down. I think there's a general upward trajectory. There is drop in books that are not keys or that are minor keys or whatever, but certain books related to certain properties are increasing like crazy. And I don't know if it's there's been talk about rich people, speculators coming in just like they do in the sports card market or other areas where instead of investing in art, for instance, they're investing in something that's a collectible and seeing that as kind of the next blue chip thing that if you buy it cheap, hold on to it, it will amass in value in 10, 20 years, just like a piece of art. And an example I want to use is a recent auction that I saw about a month ago of an Amazing Fantasy 15 I saw. I don't know who bought it, but it was crazy. It was a 3.0. It was a purple label. It was trimmed. It's never going to be anything but a purple label, restored. And somebody bought it for $150,000.
A 3.0.
Plus buyer's premium brought it just slightly under $200,000. So I don't know if this person buying it didn't realize what a purple label was versus a blue label, or just said, I've got to own this book because it was worth $3.6 million at a heritage auction a few months ago. And now so the percentage of the amount of a 9.6 versus a 3.0, this is a reasonable amount of price to pay for this book. I don't really know.
There's a handful of books that I paid $2.99 for that I stored away 10 years ago, and all of a sudden I see it popping up on IG and it's $1,000 book. And that just blows my mind that is something that can actually happen to a modern comic book.
Listen, Matt, you know me, right? And the comics that my mom let me keep. I've paid 10 and 12 cents for those. I paid 5 cents for some of them. A couple of them for my friends, which I haven't even shown yet, I paid 2 cents a piece for. So even if they're 2.0s or whatever else, I'm making a ton of money on those. Now, I never thought they would be worth anything, but I agree with that aspect of it. If you think you're going to be on here, even if you decide in 5 years you're not going to collect, just hold on to them. What can I do to maximize what a lot of people have spoken about, to maximize the collection You know, if my son is going to take a look at them and so forth, you know, which one should I send to CGC, bring the money up? But I was telling him, I said, think I'm going to sell a bunch of them. I'm looking to see the best way of doing it, you know, and that type of thing, so I can get rid of a lot of them, because I have like close to 10,000 now.
Wow.
And a lot of them I'm saying, well, you know, what am I going to do with this book, right? And he had a very interesting response to that, because I thought he would say, great, you know, it'll be less for me to, you know, manage and all that. He said, don't do it. I said, what? And he said exactly, and he's not a comic book guy, you know, he's an engineer, I guess, you know, he's a smart guy. And he said, Dad, my plan is to hold on to these, and in 10, 20 years, they all might be worth something. So he's got a point there. My wife doesn't like that point, but he's got a point.
Everyone is going after the mega key.
Yeah.
And the minor keys where the value is, go get the first Falcon. Right. You can afford it. It's going to triple in value.
Yeah.
It's the minor keys. Just don't get distracted on the monster ridiculous books, because that's where all these guys who don't, like you said, who's this person who bought this trimmed purple label? It's a person that doesn't understand the hobby. And then they're not looking at all the other amazing books.
Well, let me ask you a question, though, about this. When I first got back into comics, I would go to the Midtown Comics, you know, near my office. There's two of them that were nearby, and I would go there. And my wife said, "What are you doing? You're going back, and you're there with all these kids." I said, "No." I said, "There's no kids unless the kid is there with his mother or his father." I said, "It's all people, generally look like they're 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, whatever." I said, "I admit I might be the oldest guy in there. I don't know." I said, "But they're all older people because that's where the money is." And a lot of what I've read and I've seen is that some of the push up in prices might be some of you guys' fault. You know, and let me explain that.
Yeah.
What they said is these people that collected, let's say in the 90s, I don't know if that's you, but I think kind of might be. You know, people that collected in their 90s didn't have cash or money to buy all these things. But now that they have cash or money, they're going back and they're saying, I want to buy all the stuff I couldn't buy when I was a kid. Yeah.
$4.99, whatever, $3.99, $4.99 for new books. I mean, how many books are new kids going to be able to buy, or the parents are going to be able to afford? Most families. That's expensive. Mm-hmm. So it's hard to get new people into the hobby at those prices.
So then who's going to come in? Just people who are going to be speculating it, or, you know, or just older people are going to keep speculating on things that they like or want? I mean, to me, it seems that at some point in time, you might have the bottom fall out.
That's a real concern for me, because, Joe, when you talk about buying in the 1960s, and this is by no means an insult, this is just the reality of the situation. Even me, growing up in the 80s and 90s, guys, we had television and reading, and that was our entertainment sources. Now, you could play in Atari or Nintendo, but they weren't as immersive as the video games now are, and you got tired of it. So my sources of entertainment were to go hunting, sports, television, or reading. And if it was a rainy day, I couldn't play sports. You get sick, and I really didn't want to be out in the woods, you know, during rain. And you know what? You get tired of television after a while, so you go to reading. Nowadays, kids, I mean, we're on our phones right now. You know, there's so many little app games on the phones, social media on the phones, or computer something. Video games, I mean, my gosh, you can play with 30 people in one video game. And there's just so many entertainment sources other than comic books.
So I just see it. All the kids have a short box in their closet. One likes The Flash, one likes Batman. And I'm not trying to make them read comic books, but they love it and they're gravitating towards it. It's on the television. It's on the big screen. I think back to the first bootleg Punisher movie that I saw, and where we've come from that, and we're in a good place now. That's my opinion.
You have a great point. A lot of 90s people that love Wolverine weren't necessarily comic book readers in the 90s. They just liked the animated show on Saturday mornings. You know, and they just grew up loving that. Alan, I think you're one of those kids, aren't you?
Yep, that is me.
That's your introduction. So you hit on a lot of good points. You don't necessarily have to be reading comic books today as a child to appreciate them in the future.
I'm just concerned that we're going to have a generation of kids who are going to grow up who are only going to know the characters from other media, and that these media will cause these characters to grow beyond their original source material of comics. And then you're going to find that the kids may not necessarily want to read the comics. They're content watching shows or waiting for the next cartoon or buying a statue, or, you know, that for them it's a visual media, these characters. It's not a written media, and they'll be content with what's being put out now and not go back to read the books, or not want to read new books that are being published. And, you know, it's like in school, like you get a book to read for a book report. It's like, no, I'll watch the movie. Thanks. Same thing with comics. That's a little concern. I hope it doesn't happen, but it's a little concern for me.
Right. So I'll tell you what, unless anybody has anything else to say, I think we've talked this to the end and have no conclusion for everybody that's watching. So sorry, guys.
I was going to say, we could talk about this all day and we would still not come to a conclusion.
I think, you know, it sounds kind of obvious, but I think there's a certain value in, you know, not to paraphrase Master Blaster, but buy what you love, right? Like buy what you love, complete collections that are meaningful to you. At the end of the day, that will bring you more joy. And if you have good taste in comics, those books will ultimately be worth a lot too. So I mean, I think it's going to be kind of like you'll kind of get a benefit in both ways.
Well, I guess we couldn't get to a single conclusion of whether we thought there was a price correction during that time in 2022. But now that we're in 2024, looking back, I do see that there was a trend between corrections in prices from 2022 to now. So I guess we were in the middle of a correction. I'll say that I do still see some big books that kind of stayed steadily high. There might be a correction, but I don't think we're necessarily going to get back to the pre-2020 prices of a lot of these books based off of just the popularity of comic books and comic characters in general. So what are your thoughts? What are your opinions about where we are today? How do you see the health of the comic book community? And are we still in the middle of this correction? Have we hit the bottom? Is it only up from here? Are we in a bubble? I'd love to hear your comments below, and we'll see you later.